Good evening and welcome to the May version of Arroyo Currents. We've been waiting a long time. Things are kind of building towards a climax here. You know, we've been working on water issues and trying to affect water policy in Pasadena for quite a while, and they have kept backing up the timetable for the final city council decision on these issues. They've now set the hearing for June 7th on the certification of the environmental impact report, which the Arroyo Seco Foundation and Pasadena Audubon and Ken Cools and Maury Wolfson and Hugh Bowles have all challenged. And that's going to be heard by the city council on June 7th. So this is really a key time, and they're considering the urban water management plan on that night too. And they're also looking at the 25-year water system and resources plan, which they are scheduled to hear at the end of June. So this is a very opportune time to get together and talk about what's going on in the Arroyo. There's a lot of good stuff going on in the Arroyo, and there's a lot of important stuff going on in the Arroyo. So tonight's meeting, we build it as the meeting to deal with the big ditch. Or the big drain, rather. We've been dealing with the big ditch for the last 10 years, haven't we? The big dig, we called it, and the play on words with the big drain is quite intentional, as a matter of fact. But some people have said, well, why do you call it the big drain? And you know, really, if you think about it, that's what it is. The Arroyo Seco Canyon project is a project that basically is designed to give Pasadena Water and Power more so-called rights to pump water out of the groundwater basin. That's what it's about. And we're very concerned that during the time when fish and aquatic species are most vulnerable in the late spring and early summer, they're going to be totally draining the stream, taking every bit they can get out of it. And they say, well, we've been doing that for years. Well, okay. Does that make it good? And then with regard to the groundwater basin, all of this is in the context of not having a plan to resolve the overdraft of the groundwater basin, to stabilize the groundwater level, and hopefully to even replenish the groundwater basin so that it is a healthy groundwater basin for the future. So these things are very important. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we have a lot of really good speakers here this evening who are going to take up various aspects of the program. And then we also want to have, we want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. We'll have a little panel discussion after the speakers make their presentations, and then, you know, to ask questions or to say what you want to say. So we hope that this will be a very participatory meeting for you, and that you'll learn a lot from it, and that you'll take action coming out of it in order to work for a more sustainable and resilient water policy and environmental policy here in our region. So let me go over a little bit of who's here this evening, going to be saying something important, and you know, has a report prepared. And the first is Ken Cools, who's going to talk about groundwater issues and the importance of groundwater issues. And I'll turn on your mic in just a minute, Ken. Don't get too anxious here, okay? And then following Ken, we'd like to hear from Mitchell Sy, our attorney. Mitchell is Southern California's most prominent environmental attorney. And I'm going to keep repeating it until it's true. But anyway, he's been a wonderful representative for us. So he's going to actually talk about, you know, what are the CEQA requirements and what is the city required to do when very substantial new issues arise, like, for instance, the presence of hundreds of rainbow trout in the Arroyo Seco, when Pasadena's environmental impact report says there's no fish in the Arroyo Seco. So Mitchell's going to kind of talk about that issue, about what does Pasadena have to do to really properly process that information in accord with the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act. And then following that, we're going to have Angel Pinedo, who's going to talk about special species and steelhead trout and some of the recent developments. And Angel, just to give you a taste of what he's doing, Angel we've got some great pictures of Angel in a wetsuit in the stream, looking underwater for trout and finding trout in behind little rocks and crevices and things like that with a big flashlight. And it's incredible footage. And I wish we had it available to show to you right away, but it's really interesting. And so I asked how cold the water was this Sunday morning when Angel did that. And the answer came back that it was 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Whew. So anyway, so Angel is going to speak about the steelhead and special species in the Arroyo. Parker Davis is going to talk about the alluvial stream zone and the spreading basins and what we think of those. And then Hugh Bowles is going to talk about stream issues. And so after that, you know, we hope there'll be time for everybody to ask whatever questions you have, as well as to say what you'd like to say and discuss, you know, how we can be most effective in terms of shaping local water policy in a very sustainable and resilient way. So with that, I'm going to try to find Ken's mute switch on Ken.
So tonight, I'm going to try to answer the question, why does the decline in the Raymond Basin groundwater levels matter? You'll be hearing some of the information that I used in the previous presentation, but I didn't get into any detail on those. And tonight, I'm going to try to talk in some detail. This is the graphic that I showed in the previous presentation. This is taken from a Stanford website. The URL is at the bottom of the page here, and I've posted the URL in the chat page. So if you wanted to visit that URL, you can go copy the text from the chat, and you can go to that web page yourself. It's really an extensive page. It's quite lengthy and talks in detail about stuff. But doesn't talk specifically about Pasadena. What this map shows is places in California where in the last decade, the groundwater has decreased 10 feet or more. And you can see that most of the red dots, the bad ones, are concentrated in the Central Valley, but there are some in Southern California as well. Now, Pasadena has seen actually for a number of decades, has seen about 33 feet per year decline in the Pasadena area. And I'll talk about the Pasadena area in a moment. In the Monk Hill area, which is up near the Arroyo, in the last decade, it's seen about an 80-foot decline. So that's how Pasadena should have gotten on this map. So what happens when you see those kinds of declines? You have both direct impacts, indirect impacts, and I'm going to talk about the indirect impacts first. You potentially will see land subsidence. That's something that happens over a very long period of time. And one of the things you have to understand, though, is if you don't measure for it, you're not going to know if it happened. And it's something that you do have to pay attention to know whether you have land subsidence in your area. That's where the groundwater declines, and the soils that formerly had the groundwater in them, the pore space between the soils, the water goes away, and you see the soils become compressed, and that compression causes the surface land to drop down. You can see infrastructure damage. Land subsidence itself can cause problems with wells. It can wreak havoc over things like storm drain systems, sewer drainage systems, things that depend on slope to perform. Those are the kinds of things that might happen with land subsidence. And then there are economic losses from unreliable water supply. If you don't have reliable water, your economy will suffer. You then have to restructure how you manage your economy. And I'm not going to talk about those in any great detail. I am going to talk tonight about the direct impacts: reduced water supply, increased pumping costs, magnification of the water quality impacts, and costs of well replacement. Those are four major impacts from declining groundwater. So this is the Raymond Basin, the area that's shown in the green, the heavy green line. It's divided up into 3 sub-areas. The Pasadena area, which I mentioned earlier, that's the area that's seen the 33-foot decline annually or every decade. The Monk Hill Basin, up where the Arroyo is, and the Santa Anita sub-area. And we're not going to be concerned with the Santa Anita sub-area because Pasadena doesn't have any water rights in the Santa Anita sub-area. Its water rights are all in the Pasadena and Monk Hill Basin areas. And then the fault, the Raymond Basin fault, is along the southerly alignment of that green line. And on the other side of the fault is the main San Gabriel Basin. So as I mentioned, the 33 feet per decade decline, and that's been since about late 1940s, around 1950. It's been declining at a rate of about 33 feet per decade. And that's about a straight line. It's a fairly straight line decline. The Monk Hill, as I mentioned, about 80 feet per decade. And really that's only been in the last decade. But as you can see on the graphic there, the groundwater levels have dropped dramatically in that period of time. And largely associated with the drought, but also related to flaws in the judgment that I'm not going to go into. So here I've shown a cross section of that goes through the Monk Hill Basin, the Pasadena area, and the main San Gabriel Basin. On the left is the Monk Hill Basin. That blue area is, represents the bathtub, if you will, the water that wells up in the basin under the ground. Depth to bedrock is 450 to 750 feet. And you can see that little trench up in the left-hand corner is the Arroyo Seco. The Pasadena area, much larger basin, also much deeper. It's more than 1,200 feet below the ground surface in the Pasadena area. And then the main San Gabriel Basin is down below. Now what happens here is water leaks from the Monk Hill Basin through fissures in the bedrock, and in places it might actually overflow the bedrock. But that water goes into the Pasadena area. Likewise, there's water that leaks from the Pasadena area that goes into the main San Gabriel Basin. And all of these factors were taken into account when they declared the judgment back in 1944 and amended in 1955. They considered these exchanges of water between the basins. But you have a stair-stepped arrangement where water moves from one basin to another. So what happens if there's a decline in one of the basins, and what impacts does that have sort of physically? Well, you see less water in reserve. All of a sudden now you have less water in the pool, and that water isn't going to restore itself. And gradually you could draw it down to the point that it goes away entirely. But and then at the same time, you have to spend more energy to pump the water because the pumping head, what we call pumping head, is greater. So it's an economic impact, and you have less reliable water. Now, I'm going to talk here about how does that affect the performance of the water production features. And what I've shown here is a very old map that shows a swampy area that used to exist down in the southern part of the Raymond Basin, over around the Huntington Hotel, as far east as, well, it goes all along just north of Huntington Drive, pretty much follows Huntington Drive. And what's notable about this particular area is that, and it's important to me because I live in the neighborhood, the Mission Dam is smack dab in the middle of that. If you're familiar with the San Gabriel Mission Dam, back in the day, centuries ago, they built a zanja, or a ditch, that went down to the San Gabriel Mission to provide water from the surface water from Raymond Basin. That swampy area that was actually dammed and drained and used to support the initial developments in Southern California. But of course, that no longer exists. Groundwater pumping came in the early 1900s. And with the groundwater pumping, you saw lowered groundwater levels. And that swampy area is now underneath where my house is, high and dry. And there's no more surface water there. In fact, I think the groundwater level here is about 200 feet deep. Similarly, moving over towards Devil's Gate Dam, in the very early days of Pasadena's development, there were tunnels that were built behind, underneath the alluvium in the Devil's Gate area. And this little picture down to the lower left shows a weir that was constructed to capture surface water that was welling up from the ground. It captured that surface water to feed tunnels that were built again under the alluvium. I think the tunnels are about 150 feet deep in the alluvium behind Devil's Gate Dam. And here's a graphic that shows the tunnel arrangement. And it's kind of hard to read. It's an engineering graphic, so I'm going to try to walk you through it. So this is the 210 freeway in the green strip there. There's Devil's Gate Dam in the pink. And those of you that are familiar with that area, you might recognize the different streets there. But this is the alignment of the tunnels. It was a network of tunnels that were built in increments in that purple area. And on the where it says Northwest Branch, basically that's along the foot of the bluffs that overlook the arroyo in that area. But these tunnels were dug 150 feet deep, roughly 150 feet deep. They're horizontal wells is what you think of them as. Water would seep into porous parts of the tunnel and drain out through the outlet. This diagram here shows the shape of the tunnel. It's 5 feet high and 3 feet deep, and it still exists. There's some that have been abandoned, some areas that have been abandoned, but that tunnel still exists. And the water came out where that circle is there. And if you've walked down the pathway, gone through the tunnel under the bridge and walked down the pathway that gets you down to the arroyo, downstream of Devil's Gate Dam, there's a small building there. And that building was built at the location where that red circle is. And that's the chlorination building. So that's where the water came out. And it was, again, this is really the backbone of water development that made Pasadena what it is today, back in the early 1900s. Actually, I think it went into the 1800s. So this is a graph that shows the tunnel flow between 2008 and 2013. If I had the data, I'd show you much further back. But what you see is that it ranged in the earlier years in this graph from about 450 acre feet per year up to almost 800 acre feet per year. And by comparison, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project is looking to develop 1,100 acre feet per year. So it was a fairly substantial amount of flow that would come through the tunnel, and it was fairly reliable. It did waffle up and down, but it was reasonably reliable. However, this shows the report to the state. The city has to report to the state on the water that they capture from the tunnel. What you see in August 2013, the discharge dropped to zero. It slowly dropped down to zero that year. After that, there's been no flow at all. No flow at all and coming out of the tunnel. And that's, it's a tremendous loss, but what it shows is what the impact of drawdown is. Here I'm showing the graph that I showed you earlier of the Monk Hill, a well in the Monk Hill Basin. And this line shows the historic low, until recently, the historic lows that were experienced. Perhaps not by coincidence, in 2013, that's when the groundwater levels in the Monk Hill Basin dropped down below historic lows. Coincidence? I don't think so. I think there's a correlation and causation there. And unless groundwater levels come back up again, which is hard to imagine, those tunnel water are gone probably forever. So now we'll talk about how groundwater level decline affects production wells, the pumping wells. This graphic this shows the ground profile. It's hypothetical, it's just a cartoon. Groundwater level, and the vadose zone, which is it's the unsaturated zone, or the vadose zone. It's the area between the ground and the groundwater level that is moist but not wet. It's not saturated. And water that hits the ground will slowly percolate through the vadose zone and get to the groundwater level, and that's how the safe yield sustains itself. Here I've shown a cartoon well casing, pipe in the ground. But that pipe has a screen or an intake that's placed strategically. And it's basically a pipe with holes in it that allows water to seep into the pipe and allows the pump to pump the water up through the well casing. So this scenario is what it looks like when you have a new well and there's no pumping. This one shows what you have with a new well, and it's designed so, let me explain this. As you turn the pump on, you start seeing a decline in the groundwater level surrounding the casing. And that's what we call the pumping cone. And at some point it becomes flat and there's no effect, but you have a pumping cone. And of course you design your screens to be below that decline that you see, that pumping cone that you see, and that's how the system works. When you see a moderate decline in the groundwater levels, your pumping cone is still higher than the screen, so you're okay. Not a good sign, but you're okay. However, as you start getting what I call the marginal decline, you start seeing that your pumping cone starts getting into your screen area. And what happens there is the pumps then starts pumping in air that it collects from the vadose zone, because there is air contained in the vadose zone. So you see air getting in there, and you see air entrainment, and that's a kiss of death for pump operations. Pumps don't like to operate with air in them. So what you can do there is you can say, well, it takes a while for that pumping cone to develop. It doesn't develop as soon as you turn the pump on. So you can, in this condition, you can run the wells for a while until the pumping cone starts getting down to the screens, and then turn them off. And of course, that's not a good solution, because now you only have a partially operating pump. You can't pump as much water as you'd like to get out of that pump. But you can make it work. However, when the groundwater levels declines dramatically, a severe decline, really there's nothing you can do. You can't. Turning the wells off and letting it relax doesn't work. Basically, you've lost your well, and you have to drill a new one. You can't move that screen. You can't redevelop this well and make it work. So you have to come up with a new well. So this is out of PWP's Water System Resources Plan. They have 18 wells, 9 of which are currently active. And here's a table that lists the active wells and the inactive wells. If you take a look at that one at the bottom, what you see is that they quit using it at one point. They turned it back on in September and found that it was able to produce water, and they're producing water for irrigation purposes. But it's likely that well is probably going to again start sucking air, and they'll lose it again. But this gives you an idea of the wells that they have. Some of these wells don't operate year round. And my suspicion is because they are in those marginal category where they have to shut them off to allow the pumping cone to recover. What's notable in this table is nitrate is prevalent in all of the wells but the Arroyo well. I point to nitrate particularly because these other contaminants, perchlorate, TCE, PCE, these are things that were introduced through industrial and commercial operations in Pasadena. They're things that if you know about Silent Spring, they're a Silent Spring kind of thing where somebody's thumb wasn't on the pulse and contamination occurred from human activities that are more recent. However, nitrates are something that all water has nitrate in it. But what happens with groundwater, particularly where you have either agricultural practices that over fertilize or septic systems that discharge water to a drain system that percolates into the ground, common denominator is poop. It's poop. And poop has a lot of nitrate in it. And the nitrate that you're seeing there is probably a byproduct of the early septic systems that were used in the Altadena area and the La Cañada Flint Ridge area, and still are being used in small areas of the La Cañada Flint Ridge. And there's probably some contribution from agriculture, but none of that exists anymore. The only fertilizer that's used is on people's lawns, and I hazard to guess that that's not significant enough to create a real problem for the groundwater. It's not typically a problem in most urban areas, landscape fertilizers. So nitrate is a common denominator, and what's happened is nitrate has gotten worse as time has gone on. I can't show you the numbers because they don't share the numbers, but it's clear here that all but one of their production wells has a problem with nitrates. And that suggests that the decline in the groundwater levels is responsible for that. And further decline will probably just further exacerbate that problem. So what do they do with this nitrate and all of these contaminants that they're seeing in their wells? Well, what they do is they can't deliver them directly to the system because they exceed the MCLs, what's called MCLs, the regulatory standards that are set by the Public Health Department. So what they do is they deliver water to the three major reservoirs, Jones, Sunset, and Windsor in the area, and they blend it with imported water, which doesn't have any of these contaminations. Its only sin is to have total dissolved solids, which aren't regulated for drinking water. And they blend in all three of these wells. It first started out, I think Sunset was the first one to start blending. Eventually, they started doing it in the Jones Reservoir, and now they're also doing it at the Windsor Reservoir. And the Windsor Reservoir is also the reservoir that receives the treated water from the perchlorate treatment plant that JPL helped finance. These are some tables out of they have to get, PWP had to get a permit from the state to do blending. And this gives you some feeling that the one in the bottom particularly gives you a feeling for the level of contaminants. For nitrate, NO3 is NO3. The regulatory limit is 45. And so they've exceeded that in two of their wells, and they're bumping up against it in a third well. And that shows the level of contamination that they're getting. And this is out of the Public Health Goals annual report, where it talks about Windsor Reservoir. So Windsor also gets nitrate water for blending. So what do you do when you have wells that fail, or you have wells that have water quality problems that you don't want to deal with? You build a new one. They cost roughly $3 million a piece. They're for a short period of time, and when I say short, it's 2 or 3 months. They're tremendously disruptive to the community because they operate 24 hours. The drilling operations operate 24 hours a day, and it goes on for several weeks, depending on the depth of the well and the hardness of the material. It's a lot of community disruption. And then there's uncertainty. are you putting a well in a place that has better water quality, if that's what you're trying to solve for? And can you get the well production out of it? You know, there's a little bit of magic that goes into locating wells, and some experience. You've heard of water witching, you know, people that go out with a little forked stick and try to, well, it's pretty much, there's a lot of uncertainty with putting in new wells, and you're staking a $3 million bet that you got a good well. So those are generally the kinds of impacts that you see. And what I want to do here is consider the similarity of these impacts to other climate change impacts. That results from decades of neglect. It's been since 1950 that this problem with decline has persisted under a judgment that was designed to keep that from happening. Even when you try to stabilize the conditions, if you just wanted to stop the drop or the drain, it's challenging in terms of politics and costs. They're much like climate change. There are people that just don't believe that it's a problem to continue pumping the water. I've had people ask me, how long can you pump at the rates that we're pumping before there's no water left? And I can't answer that question. But they don't necessarily believe that it's a problem. And it's inevitable. Unless you do something to stop the decline, it's not going to solve the problem by itself. We're seeing a drought. We saw 2012 through 2016, we had the worst drought in history. This year, we're seeing just as severe a problem as we saw in each individual year back then. We're not out of the woods. And then lastly, it's potentially severe. I mean, imagine if you had so little water to plan for that you had to require conservation. You had to require people to, I don't know, take a bath every other day, or, you know, no swimming pools, no landscape water. It could get to that point, and it's really concerning. And then lastly, we're kicking the can on this problem down the road to future generations. And I, for one, don't want my son to have to deal with this. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ken. And now we're going to move directly to Mitchell Sy, an outstanding environmental attorney. And I wanted to pose a question, Mitchell, that I hope you'll answer, and that is, what happens when there's a change of circumstances, when there's new information that is introduced into the process that's very significant? What does an agency that's, you know, seeking an environmental impact report approval, what do they have to do? And I would say specifically, we now know that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has moved 469 native trout into the Arroyo Seco, which totally undercuts Pasadena's contention that there's no fish in the Arroyo. I think Ken and Hugh Bowles and others have raised a lot of very serious questions about the efficacy of the spreading basins and the kind of hydrology that exists in the Hamung area, and whether that's really the best way to percolate groundwater. And also this big issue that Ken has just been so eloquent about with regard to the health of the Raymond Basin, which has largely been ignored by the Pasadena Water and Power Department. What happens when new information like that emerges in the process? Can you answer that, Mitchell?
Absolutely, Tim. So if there is what is called significant new information under CEQA, which among other things can include evidence of a significant new impact or evidence of significant increase in the severity of an impact for a particular project, then the project needs to be revised and recirculated in draft form so that the public can have a chance to comment upon and review this new significant new information. And so, Tim, today, I guess if I could share my screen, I wanted to talk a little bit and go over the EIR a little bit today and talk about both, mostly I was planning on talking about trout, but I could also talk a little bit about the implications of Mr. Kuehl's research legally as well, in terms of that. But I would say that both of those issues, both the impact on fish populations in the arroyo and the impact of impact on the groundwater basin, are either information that the EIR fails to adequately review as of the beginning or requires revision and recirculation in a new draft, but prior to approval of this project. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the EIR first.
I think you can share screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So here's a copy of that EIR right here. It was released back in June 15th of 2020. The final EIR was recently released about a few months ago or so. And we're going to be talking about trout impacts first, fish impacts first. And you'll notice on page 103, let me just go right there. I'm going to zoom in on the highlighted text here. And sorry, I don't have a prepared presentation tonight, so I'm just sort of winging it with these PDFs. You'll find that they find in the biological resources section of the EIR that there is no significant impacts to there are no significant impacts to the there are no fish populations in the arroyo. In particular, they find, quote, there are currently no fish inhabiting the Arroyo Seco above Devil's Gate Dam. Now, that's very that was sort of a consternation to a lot of us out here, and the reason for that is, and it was certainly a consternation to Department of Fish and Wildlife, which in fall of 2020, shortly after the draft EIR was released, released a report that documented that they had in fact planted a total of 469 rainbow trout between November 24th and December 1st of 2020. So that would be in our opinion, that would be significant new information that renders the current EIR defective, and which has a very simple remedy under CEQA, which would be to revise and recirculate the environmental impact report. In addition to that, CEQA requires full disclosure of the environmental baseline and potential impacts here. And since the EIR claims that there are no fish populations in the arroyo, we can go back to here and say, as you find, they don't disclose potentially significant fish impacts. And so that's both an omission of information, a basic failure to provide information to the public that's supposed to be available under EIR, but it's also a basis for providing significant new information and revising and recirculating the environmental impact report. Finally, there's also another implication, which is that the Fish and Game Code requires fish passage over the dam, and that the stream flow in the river be maintained at such a level as to protect existing fish populations. Currently, the city is saying that they don't have to abide by those mandates because they claim that there is no fish in the arroyo. You can clearly see here that that's clearly not true, according to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, blatantly and openly. Finally, with regards to the concerns about impact to groundwater quality, that's certainly an environmental impact that needs to be adequately reviewed in an environmental impact report. But not only that, but also CEQA requires that projects undergo environmental review and review their consistency with statewide, regional, and local policy plans. And that would include things such as the Raymond Basin water adjudication and other issues. And so if there is an inconsistency between a project and the groundwater management plans for this particular area, that needed to be discussed in the EIR. And from my understanding, that it has not been disclosed to the public, these particular problems that Mr. Kuehl has pointed out here. Tim, do you have any other questions? Because that's all I had for today.
No, thank you, Mitchell. That's very informative. I think your answer was very clear and crisp, and I think the city council should respond to it appropriately, because clearly that is the remedy I mean, that at a minimum, the remedy is to revise and recirculate the EIR to answer these big questions that have been raised. And Pasadena hasn't been doing that. They did not do that in the final environmental impact report, and they haven't done it since then either. So you've made it very clear what the appropriate action under CEQA is. Thanks, Mitchell.
Thank you, Tim.
All right. Now, there are, in addition to the steelhead, or rather the rainbow trout that are in the arroyo, which are, wannabe steelhead. There are other species as well that are very important and designated as special species that need special concern by agencies like Pasadena Water and Power when they do projects like they're doing. Angel Pinedo, the education director of the Arroyo Seco Foundation, has been doing a series of activities, doing trout scouting and all sorts of things like that, going up there and working with some of our volunteers in order to find trout. And it's really magic that in the last few months, the trout that have been much more prominent. Now, we believe that there have always been trout in the Arroyo Seco for the last many years into the past, really. Trout have been present in the Arroyo Seco for 2 million years. And so it was pretty arrogant and ignorant of the Pasadena Water and Power Department to say that there's no fish in the arroyo to begin with. However, after the Department of Fish and Wildlife's program last fall, where they did a rescue program from the West Fork of the San Gabriel River in order to move 469 rainbow trout into the Arroyo Seco, there's absolutely no question that there's a thriving fish population in the Arroyo Seco that needs to be provided for. And as Mitchell pointed out, they said, oh, well, we don't have to do that until, I mean, they actually use language in other parts of the document where they say, we don't have to do that until fish passage to the ocean, from the ocean to the mountains is reestablished. Well, that's a pretty ridiculous position and clearly wrong. So anyway, Angel's been doing some great work on these issues of species of special concern. And so we wanted to give Angel the opportunity to tell people what he's been up to. And I think you'll find it exciting and informative. Angel, you're on.
Hello, nice to have everyone. Good to see familiar faces and names on the screen. My name is Angel Pinedo, the Education Director for the Arroyo Seco Foundation. Let me start off with the video of what our program with our called Trout Scouts have done just this last weekend with the LA Times, which came and joined us as well. Let me share my screen. Here we go. But I'm not the most flattering in a wetsuit, but remember, you're not there to watch me. Okay, can we see this? We're good? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
This is one of our trout scouts, Gary. And there's Daryl in the background. Here's our reporters. Look towards the center of the screen. They're very small, and I was able to get a little bit closer, but you'll notice that these are rainbow trout par. There they are. You see one swimming around there. So these are our babies. There we go. Okay. Let me put up my PowerPoint. So this is our Trout Scout program. I do want to mention that the EIR from Pasadena was criticized by California Fish and Wildlife for only doing surface observations. Those little baby trout are so small, you cannot see them from just the surface. You have to get in the water. And Fish and Wildlife has told Pasadena that for a sufficient survey of trout or any other native fish, you need to go in the water. We've been working with our veteran fishermen as well, which has helped us with their experience into finding them. We're like, hey, this looks like a good area. And then either myself or another volunteer will get in the water and actually go look for them ourselves, finding them hidden in the crevices. So this presentation I'm calling the Restoring the Steelhead. And just as a reminder that what is steelhead is that steelhead is rainbow trout. They are the same species. I know that sometimes it gets a little difficult. They look very different, and they have two very different life histories, but they are the same animal. And specifically, this is coastal rainbow trout, which is a subspecies of the rainbow trout themselves. They are anadromous, which means that they migrate to the ocean. And those rainbow trout that migrate to the ocean turn into steelhead and then come back up through the LA River and up through the mountains, such as the Arroyo Seco and the San Gabriels, in order to spawn. Resident rainbows, which are those rainbows, are those that actually stay within the mountains and in the streams and do not go to the ocean. Steelhead can give birth to rainbow trout, and resident rainbow trout can give birth to steelhead as well. They can send off that same genetic material, which is why it's so important that conservation for steelhead also include rainbow trout, because it's the same animal. Diversions in land conversion have reduced numbers historically. Dams have landlocked a lot of populations, groundwater pumping, urban runoff, and the hatchery stock do not breed with native fish. This has led to many reasons to why there has been reduction in numbers of steelhead. The historical population of steelhead used to be in the tens of thousands. Currently, there is less than 1,000 of individual steelhead, period. Here's just a historical photo of what they looked like, of how big they used to get, in particular in Los Angeles. There is a possible extinction for trout, as indicated by researchers. The prediction is that they can go extinct within 50 to 100 years. And with climate change exacerbating that problem, that becomes even more concerning. Here's just an aerial drone footage of the spreading basins currently, of what they look like right now. The project does plan to expand these basins in order to be able to hold more of the diverted water from the Arroyo Seco. It should be noted that PWP wants to collect about 25 CFS or cubic feet per second, which is equivalent to about a little more than 11,000 gallons per minute of Arroyo Seco water. Keep in mind that the average amount of CFS in the Arroyo Seco is 7. So they want 25 when the average is 7. And at drier seasons, this average is 2. They have not indicated timing in their EIR, which CDFW has also criticized them for as well. They have not indicated any plan for how much volume or the timing of it. Water diversions, such as the one that we just mentioned, such as dams as well, remove surface flow. It also disconnects from any restoration efforts that are happening in the Los Angeles River, particularly the Los Angeles River Fish Passage and Habitat Structures Design Project. That's a very long title, but we got to do our best. Or LAR-FPHS, which is looking to restoring habitat for steelhead. As climate change continues to warm temperatures, it's going to be the Arroyo Seco as well as the San Gabriels that are going to be a refuge with colder water for steelhead and trout to survive in. If we make a good refuge for them in the LA River, that's great. We need that connection. But with warming water, they're going to need that cold water refuge, because as a paper I was just reading recently right now, is that the warmer the water gets, that there is a thermal threshold for them. They can only handle up to like mid 74 degrees Fahrenheit before that's it. They cannot go any warmer. Also, the warmer the water gets, they also tend to hatch a lot earlier. And even though they hatch earlier, will also be smaller. Dams have a lot of particularly the same problems as from water diversions. These remove and reduce flow downstream. This creates isolating pools and isolating populations genetically. This risks local extinctions because, hey, now that you've blocked the flow from downstream, you're leaving populations isolated in little areas where there is sufficient flow or lower flow. And any issue that happens, such as a wildfire that sends sediment down into an area, such as the case of what happened with the Bobcat fire and why CDFW took a lot of those trout and put them in the arroyo, that can cause the extinction event right there for that population. This also lessens oxygen, which is especially important, particularly in the summer months, and it increases temperature. So CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, last fall has transferred about over 400 rainbow trout from the West San Gabriel Fork into the Arroyo Seco. And they put them in about a 3-mile stretch of the stream below Brown Mountain Dam, which is interesting because our Steve Olivas, who was at our last presentation, found a trout and took a picture of one that was found right below Brown Mountain Dam, right at the end of it, which is intriguing because the fish passage upstream just looks impossible for fish to get up there. I mean, how could we really tell? But that begs the question that perhaps there is and still is the heritage trout or native trout that have been in the arroyo since prehistoric times. So what can we do, particularly as citizens who are concerned and don't want this to happen? Call your council member. Tell them we won't like this project. Tell them to let the river flow. We want a minimum environmental flow for fish and aquatic species. We want 3 CFS in spring and adequate water for wildlife in the summer. We want a living river and a natural stream to allow water to percolate into the ground basin rather than spreading basins. We want them to know that the Arroyo Seco Canyon project, that the groundwater pumping is not sustainable, as mentioned earlier already, that this is seriously not accounting for the threats of climate change, and that we want Pasadena to support the connection of restoration efforts in the Arroyo Seco to connect with restoration efforts in Los Angeles. The only way we're going to get steelhead back is if we can get them to the ocean. And the only way that can happen and help out too is that they have a refuge in the mountains where water is the coldest. You can also sign our petition. If you go to the arroyoseco.org, I'll repeat that again, the arroyoseco.org, go ahead and sign this petition. We plan to send it to City Council as well. Go to the website, you'll find a link for sign the petition. Please do that to get involved. You can also join us with our Trout Scout program, which is a citizen science project, which I am the lead project head for that one. You can contact me and I'll give you an email for it. And let me do a nice little collage here. We're growing a community of concerned citizens that are coming out to the Arroyo Seco, and we're getting in the water. We're bringing it, well, not everybody wants to get in the water because it's 49 degrees Fahrenheit and that's freezing. But we're also utilizing veteran fishermen. With their experience, what happens is that they'll tell me or tell us, hey, this looks like a good pool where they're hiding. We'll go in there. And there have been studies that have used the experience of fishermen. Now, we're not eating the fish. They're also using barbless hooks as well, so they're not harming them also. But here's some photos of our current snorkeling efforts. Here's me with the flashlight because it gets really dark in some of those crevices and it's good to have that. Here we have Dustin Dulani, and here we have Thea Wang as well. And here's a trout that Daryl found. Something to note as well is that the trout that have been relocated to the Arroyo Seco from the West San Gabriels, they clipped the adipose fin, so the top part of that fin. So now we know that, okay, that's what the relocated fish look like. This is great news because that means if we find any trout that have a non-clipped fin, that's heritage trout. That's our historic one. That's our prehistoric trout that's still there. This is trout that was criticized, not criticized. This is trout that Pasadena has said did not exist. Now that they exist, regardless of whether or not they were relocated or the ones that were just the heritage ones that have been there for thousands, if not millions of years. Los Angeles Times was with us last weekend. Tom Tomlinson, also known as John Tomlinson, he likes to be called Tom, the author of Against the Currents, which was published by the Aquarium of the Pacific as a historic account of steelhead in Los Angeles. By all means, if you wanted to get this book, it's a quick read. You have to contact Aquarium of the Pacific for that. Don't do the website. They don't list it. You have to literally call them for it. It's frustrating, but that's the way we do it. We're glad that we're getting involved with people and getting this word out and further conservation. We've also found other particular wildlife of concern that have been omitted or considered not present by the EIR, or the Environmental Impact Report that was issued by the judge years ago, and then later on handled by Pasadena Water and Power. Particularly, we found a garter snake just last Sunday that was observed way back in 2013, but was not observed in 2019. We found one just last Sunday right below the diversion where they planned to extend and get more water from. A note on this diversion where is that currently there is a fish screen. It is just these weird metal bars where those tiny trout that we just saw in that video will go right through. They'll go right through it and get chopped up. Any type of diversion where that's going to be built needs to take that into account. Even more so, the last time rainbow trout were surveyed in the Arroyo Seco was 2010, a year after the station fire. I'm wondering if any fish that did survive in that particular area might have got stuck into that weir perhaps. And that definitely led to mortality for some numbers there. So here's just a nice big old garter snake. They are aquatic. They do depend on aquatic invertebrates in the area as well. So this is right below the dam. So taking more water will remove a lot of this water already in that habitat. Every time we try to take a photo of it, it would run. It would, well, not run, it's a snake, but it would get into the water and hide underneath the log. So it uses that to get away from predators or just people who, want to harass it. We've also seen a species of special concern as well, the California newt. They are a species of special concern because their habitat has continued to be urbanized and removed and could very well be threatened and endangered likely in the future. This was observed in 2013, but the EIR did not observe it in 2019. We have found them not far upstream from that project area for the diversion weir. We have seen them all. We've even seen their eggs, by the way. This is not our photo. This is one I had to find. We tried to take a photo. We got video, but we'll get that video eventually. But we'll be there next Saturday. So I'll get more footage there because we're going to keep an eye on them as well. There's also we got word of this just a couple days ago, but there's supposedly a lot of frogs right now at the Lower Arroyo Park downstream from Devil's Gate Dam. I'm not sure what this species is. I'll be down there as well to try to identify it, but we're wondering if it's the endangered Arroyo toad, which is federally endangered. Keep in mind that any reduced flow from upstream is going to impact the amount of water being sent downstream. So any species that are endangered or species of special concern, anything, the plants as well, will be affected. So if anyone has any idea what this one is, please tell us. That'd be great. But I'll be there either this weekend to try to identify them as well. What can we do as well? You can learn more about the Arroyo Seco, the foundation, the Humunga Nursery, and the Trout Scout program. You're welcome to email me or at angel@arroyoseco.org or fish@arroyoseco.org. I still have some room to take some volunteers. This Saturday in the morning, we'll be meeting at the JPL parking lot. And we're gonna go again, and we're gonna snorkel. We're gonna find these fish and monitor them, identify them, and keep an eye on them, particularly in the summer months when water is going to be less, and we want to make sure that they're okay. There we go.
Is that it, Angel?
That's it. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. That was really awesome. That was an awesome romp through some very important issues, and I'm sure everyone learned a lot from it. So thank you very much. Now coming up, Parker, where are you? Parker Davis is going to talk about the alluvial stream zone and what we think about spreading basins. And then Hugh's going to follow up on that. And I'm sure have a lot of very relevant things to say about that as well. So here's Parker Davis. There you go, Parker, you're on.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me tonight. I'm going to keep this kind of short and sweet. We're just going to start by showing a little video that I created with a volunteer, Keely Luna, at the nursery about the spreading basins a few months back. And yeah, we can use that as a sort of introduction. So let me see if I can share that screen. All right, you guys seen it now?
Proposed by Pasadena Water and
Yes.
Power, more water from the Arroyo Seco. If approved, it would expand facilities at the mouth of the river at Haamonga Watershed Park and severely impact the health of one of Los Angeles' most vital ecological lifelines.
Exploring Haamonga, it's hard to miss the series of unsightly barren pits lining the east side of the park. Spreading basins are man-made zones intended to allow water to percolate into the groundwater beneath. By diverting water from the stream into these areas during large rain events, Pasadena receives credit to pump water out of Raymond Basin.
However, Pasadena's spreading basins are highly problematic. Firstly, they are rarely used, as we seldom receive sufficient rainfall to fill them. The depressions collect hydrophobic sediment in which little can grow other than invasive weeds. The city must then pay to run heavy equipment over them to mitigate fire risk, further impacting the soil and reducing drainage. Thus, much of the water evaporates off the surface. In spite of these issues, PWP wants to expand these facilities, converting an area previously slated for restoration into 6 new pits.
Haamonga contains 5 habitats unique to the canyons of Southern California. Due to development, sites like these have become increasingly rare and precious. In a critical area like the Arroyo Seco, a healthy stream zone would be a more efficient, environmentally sound way to conserve water.
An environmentally superior alternative can conserve water, protect the natural resources of Haamonga, and allow the stream itself to replenish the Raymond Basin beneath Pasadena. Don't let Pasadena and the Arroyo go the way of other lost treasures in California. Sign and share the petition now.
All right.
Great. It's really very informative. Very well done, Parker. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I also want to briefly credit Jensen Hallstrom, another volunteer that worked on that with us. He shot the drone footage, and he's been really great in terms of providing material like that. And he's also now working on an exciting ArcGIS project for us, about like kind of mapping the history of the Arroyo Seco and all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm really excited to share that with you guys in the future. And hopefully we can actually get the Trout Scout program involved with it as well. I've been meaning to bring this up with everybody. So that we can sort of combine all of the information we're gathering and get it into a map format that everybody can work from.
Great. Thanks so much, Parker.
Anytime.
All right. Now it's Hugh Bowles. Hugh Bowles is up, and Hugh lives right there, right near the mouth of the Arroyo there, and has had a lot to say for a long time defending that area and trying to keep it natural. So Hugh, you're up.
Yep. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this actually, my comment hopefully will sort of follow on from what Parker stated. On this particular, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project, I've been making comment on this since they first issued the negative declaration back in 2015. And one of the things they claimed in the initial study, there's a question there that states, will the project have an impact on any aquifer? And I don't have the exact wording in front of me. And Water and Power responded, there's going to be a less than significant impact. And in fact, they stated that by extracting another 1,000 acre-feet of water from the stream, that was going to improve aquifer recharge. In the public comment, I challenged them on that. I said, you need to prove that, because in the study that they paid for in 1995, this one here, I don't have a presentation, but in that study by Converse Consultants West, which actually interestingly talked about the yield of water from the Devil's Gate Tunnel area, what Ken was talking about earlier. But as part of that study, they did a percolation investigation of all the different alluviums in the basin. And they also looked at the spreading basins. And even though the spreading basins sat on what they called Unit 1 materials that were loose gravel, rock, and boulders or unconsolidated, they found that the spreading basins back in 1995 were by orders of magnitude worse than the percolation rates in other areas of this Unit 1 material that would include the stream zone. And they concluded that this was probably because of siltation and compaction from heavy equipment. So I challenged PWP and said, look, your study in 1995 says the spreading basins are by orders of magnitude worse than the other alluviums in the basin. Prove, where is your science to prove that if you take another 1,000 acre-feet of water out of the stream and stick them in these spreading basins, prove to us that you're going to recharge, improve the recharge of the aquifer. And their written response in 1995 to that public comment was, in regard to the spreading basins, regardless, we have to use them regardless of their efficiency. That to me was pretty much an admission that the spreading basins are inefficient. At the Board of Zoning Appeals for the mitigated neg deck, the chair, Greg Jones, asked Gary Takara, said, look, if the spreading basins are inefficient and everyone knows they're inefficient, why do we need the spreading basins? Gary Takara said, efficiency is not about how quickly we get water into the aquifer. He said it's about separating the city's flows from the natural flows. At the City Council hearing in 2016, Mayor Tornick asked, are spreading basins a good technology? Gary Takara responded, they're used all over Southern California. He could not state that they were efficient. Now fast forward to November 2018, I believe, at the scoping meeting for the initial study for the EIR, where the same question is asked in the initial study and the same response came back from PWP. I asked Brad Bowman of PWP, I said to Brad, of all the, how much of the water that you divert into the spreading basins actually percolates into the aquifer? He responded, we assume it does. And then the written response to that question, again, prove, where is your science to prove that extracting more water from the stream is actually going to improve aquifer recharge? Again, they responded saying, well, spreading basins are used all over Southern California. They could not produce any material evidence to support their claim that there was going to be an improved aquifer recharge and there would be no impact on the project. They have failed to answer that question. I submitted a citizens alternative to as part of public comment, which using the hydrology study by Converse Consultants in 1995, and then this delightful tome, which is the Philip Williams study from 2000 that a member of city staff actually dropped over my gate back in 2003, thinking that I might be interested, that actually recommends, as far as the water conservation approach in the basin, that just about all the city's allocation, if left in the stream, could be absorbed before the water reaches the dam. And they calculated, based on the Converse study, that if water was left in the stream and allowed to periodically pond behind the dam, that the increase in aquifer recharge in a normal rainfall year might be as much as 160% over what it is now. And then, so I've used these two studies, and in that citizens alternative, I sort of really proposed a sort of compromise position that the project should leave the lower flows in the stream to leverage that, improve that heightened percolation capacity in the stream. and then use the spreading basins and do their diversion for the excess flows that they need in order to reach that 25 cubic feet per second allowance that so they can go and claim pumping credit. And they've spent, although I submitted that as an environmentally superior alternative, saying that they need to consider this under CEQA, that is a requirement. They spent a lot of language in their response to public comment as to why they would not consider that option, and it was never included as an alternative to the existing project, although it is perfectly feasible, as from everyone who's been discussing this this evening. It would meet the city's objectives, and it would be environmentally superior because it would allow the stream to flow during those low flow periods up to the point where at least it would reach the dam, and if not an agreed upon point prior to the dam. And that would allow sort of 99% of the year the natural stream would be allowed to flow, and diversion would only occur during the higher storm events. So that has never been seriously considered. Pasadena Water and Power have ducked and dodged and said, well, the law doesn't allow us to do it, and Raymond Basin Management Board wouldn't allow us to do it. And they will not consider that option. And at the Board of Zoning Appeals in March, they were very close to sending the EIR back with a recommendation from Tim Wendler that PWP look at maximizing the percolation capacity of the stream to improve habitat, to improve fish, natural habitats for fish and wildlife, and that they should come back with some recommendations. However, Teresa Fuentes, the city attorney, after the public meeting was closed, requested to make comment before the BZA actually voted, and was really granted a 10-minute private public meeting to the board to basically direct them that they were not in a position to actually send the EIR back. And ultimately the board approved the EIR, but they placed those conditions on there that the project should go and look at maximizing the percolation rates in the stream to improve habitat, to provide habitat for fish, etc. And I believe the board would, without that intervention from the city attorney, the board would have sent the EIR back. And I believe the city council need to take that step and send the EIR back with a recommendation, a clear mandate that they should look at maximizing the superior percolation rates in the stream. There should be a measurement done by an independent party, not PWP dam engineers, but by an independent party to compare the percolation rates in the stream compared to the spreading basins, and a calculation done on how many cubic feet per second the stream is capable of absorbing. I have photographs. I know that at 2.63 cubic feet per second on January the 27th, 2021, when there was no diversion because there's a storm coming in, water was absorbed by the stream about a mile before the dam, even though PWP and the BZA hearing try to maintain that even low flows go to the dam and the county release the water out of the dam. So that's what I'm hoping we can push for at the city council meeting, that they can really formalize those recommendations that were made by the BZA, and instead of certifying the EIR, to actually push that EIR back with a mandate to go and properly look at an environmentally superior option that includes the restoration of natural flows to the stream rather than what they want to do, which is to restore a bridge. That is the most important, critical element. And to be quite honest, if the city council go ahead and certify the EIR, then with the county creating dust bowl conditions down at the dam, and PWP creating a desert up in the upper end of the basin, the secondary motion would be to rename the area from Hucamonga to the Devil's Gate dead zone so that we can all stop worrying about it. That's it.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you. Quite a wrap up there. Very appropriate. Now, I promised everyone we were going to give them an opportunity to have something to say, and here we are. It's already 8:20, and candidly, I'd like to finish within 10 minutes or so. But so there is 10 minutes for discussion. If people have questions that they want to ask, or if they want to make a statement at this time, let me just summarize the action that we hope will come out of this meeting, and that is that you will sign the petition that's available on the Arroyo Seco website and call your city council person, call their office, send them an email, make sure to contact them. And if you don't live in Pasadena, contact the mayor. And because the city council is looking very carefully at what is the public pressure on them. They do not pay a lot of attention to these issues generally. These issues have been ignored, and largely what we've been doing is raising them to prominence, to the prominence that they deserve in order to create a sustainable and resilient future. So please call your council person, urge your friends to do so. We've got the information on the Arroyo Seco website, and we've got email addresses for all the council people, and urge your friends also to join with you in doing that. So with that, who would like to say something? Are we getting some people here in the, if you'd like to speak, why don't you indicate so in the chat function and we'll hook you up. Anybody have a question?
Can I ask a quick question, actually?
This is Parker. Go ahead.
I was curious, and I could obviously verify this myself by just, sorry, I'm trying to start my video again, but it's not letting me. But in any case, Angel, the fish that you got that Steve first found and the other mature specimens that you guys have found, did they have the clipped fin, or were they heritage ones?
We're gonna have to talk to Daryl and Steve who found them and ask them if they were clipped or not. That would definitely be very telling to see what we have. Their size does fit, however, the ones that CDFW did plant in the Arroyo Seco, because they kept it at about 5 inches and lowered. They felt that was suitable for the Arroyo Seco.
Gotcha. I didn't notice a clipped fin in either of the photographs.
Same.
I think the first one that Steve found seemed like it was 6 inches, and I didn't notice that it was clipped. And its presence at the bottom of the dam also indicates to me that was above the area where CDFW
yes.
planted their fish. So I've always kind of thought that was really a heritage native trout. But, you know, we need to try to verify that as well. Okay, so Ken reminds us that the date for the city council hearing is June 7th. So, you know, that we're going to go through a holiday weekend, and then it's 1 week until the city council will meet on the issue if they don't change the date again on us, which they've done over and over again. But okay. Elisa Fultz asks to Hugh, could you provide the title authors of the studies that you cited for efficiency of the spreading basins? Or if there are newer studies, would love to cite them when I call my council person. Hugh?
Yeah, so the Converse study from 1995 is called Hydrologic Investigation, Devil's Gate Water Collection Tunnel. And it's dated August 29th, 1995. If you submit a public records request to the city, they will provide it. I've had good luck with them. The Philip Williams study is entitled Flood Hazard Sediment Management and Water Feature Analyses, Hucamonga Watershed Park. It's by Philip Williams and Associates. They actually merged with another company then. And that was dated January the 17th, 2000. Tim, I do have a Word version of that. I'd be happy to send that to anyone, although a lot of the diagrams and everything don't come out in the Word version, but the language is written nicely. The summarization of what the study found in terms of percolation rates and estimation of percolation rates in the stream, the actually using the converse study. That's how I got the converse study, because they use the term orders of magnitude in relation to the spreading basins. I thought, well, let me go and find where that came from. And they use that converse study to do a calculation that in a normal rainfall year, if water is held periodically behind the dam, that the aquifer could recharge by over 160% improvement over what it does now. And
all right.
Yep.
Now, Laura asks for, are there a few bullets on the website that I can use to talk to my council person? Tell you what I'll do. I have everybody's email who registered for this event, and I'll send you that information, talking points, as well as the references to the 2 documents that Hugh talked about, and also give you a link where you can download those documents. And we'll do that tomorrow. So that will be sent out to everyone who registered for the event, which was about 50 people. All right.
And just a warning on the Williams study, the Williams study that sends PWP berserk, because water's then going to the dam and they have no control over the water there. So I've tried to resist using the Williams study a lot just recently, but the converse study in its terms about orders of magnitude is compelling enough on its own, I think.
You know, and I think one of the things that Hugh and I and others have found so bewildering is that the Pasadena Water and Power Department hasn't disproven what the Philip Williams study said or the Converse study said. They have refused to consider it. They have refused to even evaluate it. And as a matter of fact, in their initial study for this EIR, they started by saying, we will not consider this in-stream alternative, such as that advocated by us. They just refuse to do it. So it's not that they have disproven it. They just refuse to consider it because they say, oh, well, we have this bureaucratic process that requires that we put it into a spreading basin, which anyway is not really an adequate answer. All right. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Christy, for your comments. Thanks for joining us this evening. Any other comments? Comments or questions? All right. Well, let's stay in touch. It's going to go to the City Council June 7th for the Arroyo Seco Canyon project certification of the final environmental impact report. And unless people really get in touch with their council person and all that, we might have a very bad answer that day. They will also consider the urban water management plan at that time, which has received no public review. And they will also, at the end of the month, they're going to take a look at the 25-year plan that is based upon further pumping from the Raymond Basin rather than stabilizing the groundwater level and developing a replenishment and management program for the Raymond Basin. So these are very big decisions that are going to be the generational decisions here. You are playing a role in what's going to happen to the next generation and the one after that this month. So please take action, be motivated, be strong. All right. And with that, let's conclude this very interesting meeting. Thank you for all for attending this evening, and stay in touch for sure. Take action, please. Bye now.